When you begin the journey of genuine personal change and mental growth, something remarkable happens. The people around you start to shift. They become uncomfortable. They fidget. They make jokes that aren't quite jokes. They express concern that feels more like judgment. Sometimes they just go quiet. This isn't coincidence. This is the natural response of the human psyche when confronted with something that threatens its established patterns. When you begin to evolve mentally, when you start to question the assumptions that govern your life, when you refuse to accept the comfortable lies that most people live by, you become a mirror. And mirrors can be terrifying things. Your development threatens their comfort zones. It challenges their complacency. It forces them to confront the possibility that they too could change, could grow, could become something more than what they are. But change requires effort. It requires pain. It requires the courage to face uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world around you. Most people would rather avoid this confrontation entirely. So they respond with disguised jokes. "Oh, look who's becoming a philosopher," they'll say with a laugh that doesn't quite reach their eyes. They express concern that sounds more like veiled criticism. "Are you sure you're not taking this too seriously?" they'll ask, as if seriousness about one's own development is somehow pathological. Sometimes they just retreat into silence. They create distance. They find reasons to avoid the conversations that once flowed easily. This silence is perhaps the most honest response of all. It's the acknowledgement that something fundamental has shifted, that you're no longer the same person they once knew, and they're not sure how to relate to this new version of you. This discomfort manifests in countless ways. It's in the way they change the subject when you speak about ideas that matter to you. It's in their insistence that you're overthinking things. It's in their subtle attempts to pull you back into the comfortable mediocrity of small talk and surface-level interactions. But here's what they don't understand. This discomfort they feel isn't really about you. It's about themselves. Your growth holds up a mirror to their stagnation. Your willingness to face difficult truths highlights their preference for comfortable lies. Your mental evolution exposes their mental complacency. True mental strength is rare. It's so rare that when people encounter it, they often don't recognize it for what it is. They see someone who thinks independently, who questions assumptions, who refuses to be swayed by popular opinion or social pressure, and they label this person as difficult, arrogant, or antisocial. This strength can isolate you. It makes others judge you. It makes them misunderstand you. Because when you develop genuine mental fortitude, you stop participating in the collective delusions that bind most people together. You stop pretending that everything is fine when it's not. You stop nodding along with ideas that you know are wrong just to keep the peace. This scares people. It scares them because it exposes the weakness of those living passively, those who have abdicated their responsibility for their own thoughts and beliefs. It reveals the poverty of those living on autopilot, going through the motions of life without ever really engaging with the fundamental questions of existence. When you build a strong mind, you become a threat to the established order, not because you're trying to hurt anyone, but because your very existence challenges the comfortable assumptions that allow mediocrity to flourish. You become proof that another way is possible, that people don't have to accept the limitations that society tries to impose on them. The strong mind thinks for itself. It questions authority. It refuses to accept something just because everyone else believes it. It's willing to stand alone if necessary. And this terrifies those who have never learned to think for themselves, who have always relied on the crowd to tell them what to believe and how to behave. Building mental strength means accepting that you will be misunderstood. It means accepting that some people will dislike you for reasons they can't even articulate. It means accepting that you will sometimes stand alone, that you will sometimes be the only one in the room who sees things clearly. But this is the price of mental evolution. This is what it costs to develop a mind that cannot be broken by external pressures, that cannot be manipulated by fear or flattery, that cannot be swayed from its commitment to truth by the promise of social acceptance or material comfort. Personal transformation is not born from comfort. It's not the product of easy motivation or feel-good platitudes. Real transformation, the kind that fundamentally changes who you are at your core, is rooted in chaos, pain, and suffering. This might sound harsh, but it's the truth that most self-help gurus won't tell you. Growth doesn't happen in your comfort zone. It happens when you're forced to confront the parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore, when you're pushed to your limits, when you have no choice but to change or be destroyed. Nietzsche understood this profoundly. He wrote, "One must have chaos inside oneself to give birth to a dancing star." This isn't poetry for its own sake. It's a precise description of the psychological process that underlies all genuine transformation. The chaos inside you, the contradictions, the pain, the unresolved conflicts, the parts of yourself that don't fit together neatly. This isn't something to be feared or avoided. It's the raw material from which your higher self is forged. It's the friction that creates the heat necessary for fundamental change. Think about it. When has your most significant growth occurred? Was it during the easy times, when everything was going smoothly? Or was it during the periods of struggle, when you were forced to dig deep, when you had to find resources within yourself that you didn't even know existed? The comfortable life might be pleasant, but it's the enemy of transformation. Comfort breeds complacency. It allows you to avoid the difficult questions, to postpone the hard work of self-examination, to remain the same person you've always been. But chaos forces evolution. Pain demands adaptation. Suffering insists on growth. When you're suffering, when you're truly struggling, you have two choices. You can break, or you can become stronger. You can let the chaos destroy you, or you can use it to forge something new within yourself. This is why those who seek an easy path to transformation are doomed to disappointment. They're looking for growth without pain, strength without struggle, wisdom without suffering. But nature doesn't work that way. In nature, strength is built through resistance. Trees grow strong by bending in the wind. Muscles grow by being torn down and rebuilt. And minds grow strong by grappling with difficult truths and uncomfortable realities. Strength comes from enduring suffering and not fleeing from pain, failure, or loneliness. This is perhaps the most difficult truth to accept in our comfort-obsessed culture. We've been taught to avoid pain at all costs, to see suffering as something to be eliminated rather than something to be embraced as a teacher. But here's what we've lost in our flight from discomfort. Suffering is not the enemy of growth. It's the catalyst for it. Pain is not the opposite of strength. It's the forge in which strength is created. Failure is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of wisdom. When you stop seeking an easier life and start seeking a stronger self, everything changes. You stop running from the difficulties that life presents and start running toward them. You stop seeing challenges as obstacles and start seeing them as opportunities. You stop viewing suffering as punishment and start viewing it as preparation. This doesn't mean becoming a masochist or seeking out pain for its own sake. It means understanding that pain is inevitable, that suffering is part of the human condition, and that the only choice you have is how you respond to it. You can let it break you, or you can let it forge you. The person who has learned to face suffering as a tool has acquired something precious, the knowledge that they can endure whatever life throws at them. They've discovered that they're stronger than they knew, more resilient than they imagined, more capable than they believed. This knowledge transforms everything. It eliminates the fear that keeps most people trapped in comfortable mediocrity. It removes the anxiety that comes from not knowing whether you can handle what's coming. It provides the confidence that comes from having been tested and not found wanting. Growth happens when you stop asking, "How can I avoid this pain?" and start asking, "What can I learn from this pain?" It happens when you stop saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and start saying, "What is this trying to teach me?" The strongest people are not those who have never suffered. They're those who have suffered and learn to transform that suffering into wisdom, into strength, into a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead is perhaps one of the most misunderstood statements in all of philosophy. This isn't a celebration of atheism or an attack on religious belief. It's a recognition of something far more profound and disturbing: the end of our reliance on external, higher authority for meaning, purpose, and moral guidance. For centuries, human beings have looked outside themselves for answers to life's fundamental questions. They've sought meaning in religious institutions, purpose in political movements, moral guidance in ancient texts, or cultural traditions. They've essentially outsourced the most important aspects of human existence to external authorities. But what happens when these authorities lose their power? What happens when the old certainties crumble? When the traditional sources of meaning and purpose no longer provide the comfort and direction they once did? What happens when you realize that there's no external savior coming to rescue you from the responsibility of creating your own life? This is what Nietzsche meant by the death of God. Not the literal death of a deity, but the collapse of the entire framework that allowed human beings to avoid taking full responsibility for their own existence. It's the recognition that there's no higher power that's going to give your life meaning. No external authority that's going to tell you what's right and wrong. No ultimate parent figure that's going to take care of you. This creates radical freedom. But radical freedom is terrifying. It means that you are entirely responsible for who you become, for the choices you make, for the life you create. It means that there are no excuses, no external salvation, no one to blame if things go wrong. Most people can't handle this level of responsibility. They desperately seek new authorities to replace the old ones. They look for gurus, ideologies, movements, anything that will take the burden of self-creation off their shoulders. They want someone else to tell them what to believe, what to value, how to live. But for those who can embrace this radical freedom, it offers something extraordinary: the chance to create yourself entirely from scratch, the opportunity to become the author of your own existence, to define your own values, to create your own meaning. This is both the most liberating and the most demanding possibility imaginable. It requires you to take complete ownership of your life, to accept that you are the sole architect of your destiny, to acknowledge that your existence is entirely your responsibility. The Übermensch is Nietzsche's vision of what human beings could become if they fully embraced their radical freedom and took complete responsibility for their own existence. This is not a superhuman in the sense of having supernatural powers, but a self-mastered individual who creates their own values and morality, independent of societal approval. The Übermensch represents the pinnacle of human development. This is someone who has moved beyond the need for external validation, who has transcended the herd mentality that governs most human behavior, who has learned to think and act from their own center rather than from the expectations and demands of others. This figure embodies self-sufficiency in the deepest sense, not just the ability to provide for their own material needs, but the capacity to provide for their own spiritual and psychological needs. They don't need others to tell them what to believe or how to behave. They've developed their own internal compass, their own sense of what is valuable and meaningful. The Übermensch lives above conventional norms, not out of rebellion for its own sake, but out of a recognition that conventional norms are often arbitrary, that they serve the interests of the mediocre majority rather than the needs of the exceptional individual. They understand that most social rules are designed to keep people in line, to prevent them from questioning authority, to maintain the status quo. This doesn't mean the Übermensch is antisocial or destructive. It means they've learned to distinguish between rules that serve a genuine purpose and rules that exist only to maintain conformity. They follow their own higher law, their own sense of what is right and necessary. The will to power that drives the Übermensch is not the desire to dominate others, but the desire to master oneself. It's the drive to become everything you're capable of becoming, to actualize your highest potential, to create something extraordinary from the raw material of your existence. This is perhaps the most difficult concept to understand in our egalitarian age. We've been taught that everyone is equal, that no one is better than anyone else, that any claim to superiority is inherently wrong. But the Übermensch represents the recognition that people are not equal in their development, in their capabilities, in their willingness to take responsibility for their own existence. The Übermensch doesn't seek to rule others. They seek to rule themselves so completely that they become independent of the need for external validation or support. They become a law unto themselves, not out of arrogance, but out of the recognition that this is the only way to live with complete integrity. Building an unbreakable mind requires solitude, isolation, and separation from the herd. This is not a choice you make lightly. It's a recognition that the path to genuine strength leads away from the crowd, away from the comfortable consensus that most people live by. Loneliness is inevitable when you choose this path, not because you're antisocial or because you don't value human connection, but because others will not understand or accept your transformation. They'll see you changing, growing, becoming something different from what you were, and they'll be threatened by it. The person who is committed to developing mental strength must be prepared to walk alone. They must be willing to think thoughts that others find disturbing, to question assumptions that others take for granted, to live by principles that others find incomprehensible. This loneliness is not the same as isolation. Isolation is withdrawal from the world out of fear or weakness. Loneliness, in this context, is the natural result of having outgrown the mental and emotional frameworks that once connected you to others. It's the price of no longer being able to participate in the collective delusions that bind most people together. The strong mind cannot pretend to believe things it knows are false just to maintain social connections. It cannot nod along with ideas it knows are wrong just to keep the peace. It cannot participate in the comfortable lies that make social interaction easier, but life less authentic. This creates a profound sense of isolation. You find yourself surrounded by people who seem to be living in a different reality, who accept things you cannot accept, who believe things you cannot believe. You realize that the conversations that once engaged you now feel hollow, that the relationships that once satisfied you now feel superficial. But this loneliness is also a sign of growth. It means you've outgrown your old environment, your old ways of thinking, your old patterns of relating to others. It means you've become something new, something that doesn't fit into the old categories. The difficulty of mental strength is that it requires you to be comfortable with this loneliness. It requires you to find meaning and purpose within yourself rather than in the approval of others. It requires you to be your own companion, your own source of validation, your own judge of what is valuable and worthwhile. Strong individuals disturb collective mediocrity. This is not intentional. It's simply the natural result of refusing to participate in the comfortable consensus that allows mediocrity to flourish. When you insist on thinking for yourself, when you refuse to accept easy answers, when you demand excellence from yourself and others, you become a threat to the established order. Collective mediocrity reacts defensively to preserve conformity and punish difference. It cannot tolerate the existence of people who demonstrate that another way is possible, who show by their example that the excuses most people make for their own limitations are just that, excuses. The crowd has developed sophisticated mechanisms for dealing with those who threaten its comfortable complacency. It labels strength as arrogance, independence as coldness, authenticity as antisocial behavior. It creates a moral framework that inverts values, making weakness appear virtuous and strength appear vice. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality, a system of values created by the weak to justify their weakness and to punish the strong for their strength. Under this system, it becomes morally superior to be mediocre, to avoid standing out, to never make others uncomfortable by demonstrating excellence. The person who refuses to participate in this collective mediocrity will face resistance. They'll be labeled as difficult, as arrogant, as someone who thinks they're better than everyone else. They'll be subjected to subtle and not so subtle attempts to bring them back into line, to make them conform to the expectations of the group. But here's what the crowd doesn't understand. The strong individual is not trying to be better than others. They're trying to be better than themselves. They're not comparing themselves to others and finding others lacking. They're comparing themselves to their own potential and finding themselves lacking. The confrontation with collective mediocrity is inevitable for anyone who chooses the path of mental strength. It cannot be avoided, only endured. The question is whether you'll allow this confrontation to discourage you from pursuing your own development, or whether you'll use it as further motivation to become everything you're capable of becoming. The crowd's resentment of strength is actually a form of tribute. It's an acknowledgement that strength is real, that it's powerful, that it's something to be reckoned with. If strength were truly meaningless, the crowd would ignore it. The fact that it feels compelled to attack it reveals its own recognition of its value. Gaining mental strength means losing superficial relationships, acceptance, and comfort. This is not negotiable. It's not something you can avoid by being diplomatic or by trying to have it both ways. The very process of developing an unbreakable mind requires you to let go of the things that most people use to define their lives. You'll lose relationships that were based on shared delusions rather than genuine connection. You'll lose the acceptance of people who only accepted you when you were playing a role, when you were being what they wanted you to be rather than who you actually are. You'll lose the comfort of never having to think for yourself, of never having to take responsibility for your own beliefs and values. But here's what you gain: integrity. The knowledge that you are living according to your own deepest values, that you are being true to yourself even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something. You gain the peace that comes from knowing that you are not living a lie, that you are not pretending to be someone you're not. You gain clarity, the ability to see through the fog of social convention and cultural conditioning to what's actually true. You develop the capacity to distinguish between what's real and what's merely popular, between what's important and what's merely urgent. You gain inner presence, the ability to be fully yourself in any situation, to speak your truth regardless of how others might respond, to act from your own center rather than from the expectations of others. You develop a solidity, a groundedness that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. Most importantly, you gain freedom from manipulation. When you no longer need the approval of others to feel good about yourself, when you no longer fear their disapproval, when you no longer require their acceptance to feel worthy, you become immune to the various forms of manipulation that control most people's lives. The reward of being unbreakable is not that life becomes easier. It's that you become stronger. You develop the capacity to handle whatever life throws at you without breaking, without compromising your integrity, without betraying your deepest values. This is what it means to be truly free, not free from responsibility, but free to choose your own response to whatever circumstances you face, not free from difficulty, but free to create your own meaning in the face of difficulty, not free from pain, but free to transform pain into wisdom and strength. The time has come to make a choice. You can continue living the comfortable lie, pretending that everything is fine, going along with the crowd even when you know they're wrong. Or you can embrace the difficult path of personal authenticity, even knowing that it will cost you something. This journey requires you to speak your truth even when your voice shakes, even when others don't want to hear it, even when it makes people uncomfortable. It requires you to refuse to conform to expectations that violate your deepest values, even when conformity would be easier. The path of authenticity is not a destination you reach once and then you're done. It's an ongoing process, a constant choice to be true to yourself rather than to the expectations of others. It's a commitment to ongoing inner struggle, to the constant work of self-examination and self-creation. But this struggle is not meaningless. It's not pointless suffering. It's the process by which you become who you really are, by which you actualize your highest potential, by which you create something extraordinary from the raw material of your existence. The journey involves constant inner struggle because growth never stops. There's always another level of authenticity to reach, another layer of conditioning to shed, another aspect of yourself to understand and integrate. But this struggle is also the source of your vitality, your aliveness, your sense of purpose. This path ultimately leads to radical freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences, but the freedom to be who you really are, regardless of consequences. The freedom to think your own thoughts, to live by your own values, to create your own meaning. And with this freedom comes profound personal power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The power to remain true to your values regardless of external pressure. The power to maintain your integrity even when it's difficult. The power to create your own life rather than having it created for you by others. The choice is yours. You can continue to live as others expect you to live, or you can begin the difficult but rewarding journey of becoming who you really are. You can remain part of the crowd, or you can step out on your own. You can accept the comfortable lie, or you can embrace the difficult truth. But know this: once you begin this journey, there's no going back. Once you taste the freedom of authentic existence, you can never again be satisfied with the prison of other people's expectations. Once you develop the strength to stand alone, you can never again find comfort in the weakness of the crowd. The path is difficult, but it's also the only path worth taking. It's the path that leads to a life of meaning, purpose, and genuine fulfillment. It's the path that transforms you from a passive recipient of life into an active creator of your own existence. The choice is yours. What will you choose? If this video challenged you, changed you, or made you think differently about your relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into human psychology. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and let me know. Until next time, remember, the goal isn't to be loved by everyone. It's to be authentically yourself and let that authenticity attract the right people into your life. See you in the next video.